The president covered many topics in his State of the Union. I'm sure we'll comment on those, but I'm also interested in what did not get covered, or at least did not get covered as much as it should have in the big speech last night. There were several topics that certainly seemed like they were worth addressing at least once a year, and yet were not discussed much. The first is Obamacare. Now, he did briefly mention that more people have insurance than did in previous years, which is certainly true. And yet he spoke very little about a program that has overall done far better than many expected. And I don't just mean better than Republicans expected. It's done better than Democrats expected. Many Democrats were worried after the passage of the bill that it would not do enough to control the price of insurance. I still hold those fears, and yet insurance premiums are lower than they were a year ago. And considering the rate at which they've been rising, that is impressive and probably worth mentioning. Now, he did mention one program, the Precision Medicine Initiative, to bring us closer to curing diseases like cancer and diabetes. That sounds good. Those are horrific diseases. And yet, I don't think he took enough credit for that significant piece of legislation.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of shocked that he didn't talk more about Obamacare. I guess it's in already, right? So the debate is basically over. We'll see how it works out. But I did think he was going to say a little bit more. The funny thing, that line there that he said about cancer and diabetes, they always do that where they say something really, you just say a couple buzzwords.
Yeah.
Like, next, we're going to take care of cancer. That's really on the docket. That would be nice. We shall see. But he did leave off a couple other things that I think were even more interesting than Obamacare.
Yeah, and what I thought was interesting is I hope that he didn't feel he needed to focus on it for what you sort of implied there, that, I mean, the debate's largely over. I don't think the Democrats feel like they need to defend it very much. And yet, in the Republican response, which we'll get to a little bit later on, Joni Ernst did call it the failed policy of Obamacare. So she at least hasn't gotten the message, even if other Republicans have.
The big thing I think he left off the speech, John, is that what we're doing now?
Yeah, for fair.
It was, I mentioned it last night during the show when we were live doing it, whatever you call that, live commenting. He didn't talk about how Republicans are trying to screw over Social Security.
Yeah.
Right, with the latest thing of their accounting trick or their rules trick where they're not going to shift money into the disability portion of Social Security, which will cause a crisis starting in 2016.
Yeah.
He didn't even bring that up. That's a perfect time for him to frame the issue. So now that when we discuss it going forward, we're discussing it using Barack Obama's framing. Instead, he didn't do that. And that's a big problem. That's why conservatives, even though all their ideas are bad and American people aren't on board for any of them, when you poll them, Americans are liberal about everything, right? I mean, the reason why the Republicans are so able to get their policies instituted is because they're better at framing, they're better at messaging. And last night's speech was the perfect example of that. He didn't take credit for Obamacare. He didn't point out, again, he did the thing about we need to work together. Instead of outlining it, no, we're different. Here's what I'm for. Here's what they're for. Here's what I've been trying to do. Here's what they've been blocking. He still won't do it. He still does that bullshit of the people want us to work together. People don't give a shit who works together and who doesn't work together. You know what people care about? They care about if they can pay their mortgage, if they can see a doctor without going bankrupt, and if they can take a vacation, and if their job's not going to be outsourced, and if their kids can go to college. That's what people care about. They don't care. Oh, you know what? We didn't get any of that shit done, but they're working together. I'm so happy that they're working together. Oh, I'm sorry.
Now, okay, a couple things. One, I think he didn't mention Obamacare because out-of-pocket costs for people who have health insurance are soaring. So I think he probably figured, and looking at the polls, he's gained what he's going to get. This is my guess. He's gained what he's going to gain from it for now. Why bring it up? Social Security, even though he could have brought up some of the things you guys mentioned for sure. Social Security, you know, Jimmy, that there's a very good chance he's on board with some of the stuff the Republicans are trying to do, and that's why he didn't bring it up. So he wants to give himself, at the same time that he wants to paint a grand vision of a more liberal America, he also wants to give himself the wiggle room to move on some of these issues where he's way closer to the Republicans than I think any of us would like to see him be. And I think that's part of the problem here.
Yeah, I think Jimmy's also right that Obama, what he's doing and what he's always done, and I think last night was a great example of it, is that he goes to our heart, not necessarily our brain. So the heart part of it is all this stuff about working together. And that was, especially the last 10 minutes, which were almost like a farewell speech, it got so sappy, I thought. So he needs to go a little more to the brain. So when he says the things about the heart, like he talked a little bit for a second about campaign finance or something, and
dark
it's like,
money.
and dark money and things like that. And it's like, you know what, but at the same time, if you know anything about Obama, and we've reported on it a lot, but the mainstream media hasn't, is that he does go to these fundraisers all the time. So he kept saying...
That's one of his big advantages as a candidate, is that he raises money well.
Right, and he'll still do it. By the way, you know what I mean? He doesn't have any more campaigns to go, as he said last night, but he's still going to do it. So it's a little disingenuous when he talks about the money, and we don't want to fight and go to lunches and argue and blah, 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 when he's doing those same things. So he plays to this part of us that wants to sort of be better, while at the same time still playing both sides of the field in actuality.
And I have to say that I thought this, I agree with what you said, and I have to say also that in terms of trying to find an inspirational point or an inspirational tone, I thought, and John, you talked about it last night a little bit, the phrase middle-class economics was just a stiff as far as I'm concerned. It's like saying, Southern accounting. You know, I mean, it's just not an
Southern accounting actually sounds
Southern
kinda
accounting
good.
is, I'm going to open that company, but you know, and I do a lot of economics writing it, but I've got to say, it's just not a sexy word.
Yeah.
Middle class economics is not it's almost like, can we pick something so bland that we can tell people, that we can somehow communicate to people we're talking about them and helping them, trying to help them without actually getting them interested in what we're saying.
It's no
almost like
tax.
magically designed for boredom.
Right.
Yeah.
Am I being unfair?
No, I mean, that's the point I tried to make last night. And I also saw, by the way, I believe it was on MSNBC. It might have been Fox. Sorry, sometimes it's hard to tell them apart in terms of the quality of their broadcasting. But they criticized him for not bringing up Social Security. But the way they did it, and it's sort of foreboding, was why didn't he address the entitlement crisis? He didn't talk about that. They're trying to prod him back into exactly what you're worried about. And all the stuff about working together. I've only been reporting on the news, I guess, for a couple of years, but every time I've seen them work together, that's been the scariest time in terms of reporting. I don't want to see them working that closely together.
Yes.
And two more quick things. One is, of course, he did mention fast-tracking the TPP trade deal, which would be devastating. So the one thing he mentioned that he can get done is the horrible thing. All the things he mentioned he can't get done were the good things. That's number one. And number two, he said some weird things about corporate tax reform that could have been taken either way. We mentioned it last night. Today, Treasury Secretary Lew said he wants to close loopholes but lower the corporate tax rate by 8 points. So
that was what I was worried about. Yeah.
Now we see that he may have a new tone, but it feels a lot like the same guy we've been seeing for 6 years.
Right. I have a feeling those loopholes are not going to get closed, but they will drop the rate for 8 points.
Yeah.
That's how these things usually play out.
Which is a joke in a country when some of the most profitable corporations pay single-digit or, in some cases, negative income tax rates. They actually get more money back from the government. Yeah, we need to cut their rates a little bit. That's what's stifling job creation.
But also, you know, there were a lot of those inconsistencies, and I'm sure we could think of 10 more. But another one, for example, was when he talked about Gitmo. I mean, he ran the first time in 2008 when he ran. He ran in 2007 on closing Gitmo. Guess who's been the president for the last 6 years?
Is it Ted Cruz?
No, the guy that was giving the speech last night, Obama. So there were a lot of those inconsistencies where his rhetoric goes to the things that we all want, and I think that's your point. It goes to the things that most Americans want, and then what he actually does is a separate thing altogether.
Yeah, exactly. Like you can say certain things in your first big speech as an incoming senator that you can't really say and get away with when you've been president since as long as there have been iPhones. Basically, maybe you should have gotten something done in that time.
Oh wait, can I just throw in one more, because I thought the foreign policy stuff was the worst of what happened last night. But he said we're pushing back ISIL. Joe Biden this morning said we're losing ground to ISIL, and then accidentally, I think, much like he did with gay marriage, said we're going to need boots on the ground. So that was this morning. Joe Biden said that. So it's like, let's
Joe
all
Biden
get like
we need boots on the ground for gay marriage.
Kind of for gay marriage. I know I worded that a little strangely.
I'm not dating that guy.
That's just a night in West Hollywood. Boots on the ground. No.
Exactly.
You like that one?
Gotta love my setups. Gotta love my setups.
So, but that kind of disconnect is what I'm talking about. Like on one hand, he's saying we're
part of that is Biden's disconnect with reality,
and that totally, could be true. But on one hand, he's saying we're stopping ISIL. Literally, the next, not even 24 hours later, the vice president is on there saying they're expanding. So I don't know, which is right. I don't know.